So today we're going to talk about making the relief tile with your initial on it. My first name is Christine, so I printed off a C and a backup C just in case. And I've got a leather hard piece of clay that is about 3/4 of an inch thick. So you can see how that compares to my finger in terms of the thickness that's there. Okay, and this has become leather hard. I think that this sat outside of any kind of bag for about 4 hours on a medium dryness day. I cut it before it dried. Looks like I'm just very slightly off symmetrical, which I can fix in the end. And the first thing that I'm gonna wanna go ahead and do is take the flat side of any rib tool, it could be any type, and just go ahead and start off by smoothing what will become the back, because you're not going to really get another good chance to smooth the back as well as the sides. Just like I said, you're not going to get another chance to go back in and do this without messing it up. So, all right. And then smooth out the front, taking off any sharpness. You can of course come back in at the very end with a sponge as well. I'm seeing a little rough patch here, so I'm making sure that I smooth that over before I proceed. And I want this all to be pretty level before I begin. And then I can just use my fingertips to smooth the edges, and like I said, I'll come back in at the very end with a sponge. So now that I've got this ready, I went ahead and I went on Google Docs and I played around with different typefaces, different fonts to see what I would like. And I decided, instead of doing my full initials, which actually spell the word cab, I decided to just go with one initial, and I went with C. And this is actually the Georgia typeface, which I've always really liked. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna kind of, like, if I had scissors handy, I would cut this, but since I did not bother, I can just kind of give it a rip. And I'm gonna wanna be able to see where this is going when I'm applying it, but I don't want to cut around the actual letter itself. All right, so I'm aiming to have this pretty centered. If my letter comes too close to the edge, which I would define as like closer than like a centimeter or 1/4 of an inch, if it's closer than 1/4 of an inch to any given edge, that's where you're going to run into some issues structurally. All right, so I've gone ahead and I've got this on here. See if I can kind of get it to stick by just gently ribbing that on there, because that's going to make my life a little easier if that just stays. All right, so I've got that kind of nice and stuck on there now. And there are a couple of different ways that you could go about transferring it. I think my preferred one is going to be like poking little holes periodically. So I'm going to come in and just stab a hole through on the outside. So I don't want to violate the edge there, but I just kind of made like anchor points and I traced that. And I'm just gonna kind of keep going like around the outside of the whole thing with gentle pressure on my needle tool, picking up every now and then, especially if it starts to catch. At this point, the moisture from the clay has started to sink into the paper. So if you had a very straight-sided letter, you might do more of these little pokies. You could, in fact, go around the whole thing like it's a tattoo, just poke, 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 poke. But what I'm getting here is just a little bit of an outline. It's really important that this not shift on me at this point. So I'm just going to go really nice and gently tracing in the space just outside of the actual letter. All right, and then once you've got that, you can peel off your paper guide. And obviously there are a couple spots that I'll need to make corrections. Don't worry too much about the paper. It will eventually just kind of flake out of there. And in any case, it's definitely gonna burn out in firing. So that's what you're gonna start out with. And we'll proceed from there to figuring out which layer you'd like to be the top and come out and be left alone, which layer you'd like to be the middle ground and go a little deeper, and which layer you'd like to go even deeper than that. So decide now whether you want your letter to be what stands up and out, or if you want that to be the part that's carved in the deepest or at a midpoint, and figure out what you're gonna do with your background. So I'm gonna lay out my background a little bit now. All right, so I took my second copy of my letter C and drew some magnolia blossoms in it, and I'm gonna go ahead and transfer those lines now as well. I lined my first C up with where I'd previously carved. And I'm just giving myself enough to go on right now because I know that I can freehand the rest. If you need something to be very specific, then you're gonna wanna be really specific with your mark making. But this is just pretty loose. If you'd prefer to freehand something, you can of course do that as well. Make sure all of your marks are made how they should be placed before you lift up your paper. If your tool is starting to tug on the wet clay, you can always just do kind of like a dotting, tattooing kind of motion. All right, and there I've got the basic outline of where my floral design is gonna go. So now I just need to decide on my levels, what's gonna be raised and what's gonna be lowered. And I already know that I'm gonna have my background on a different level than the flowers and a different level than the letter C. So this I think is gonna be like background level, middle ground, and like front ground is gonna be floral, as well as this background here, which I'm gonna do just a texture on. And now I carve.